guys, welcome back to my channel. Simone here, and today I'm going to be refilming my November wrap-up. A few people saw it before I managed to take it down, but basically there was some problem with my footage and I don't know if it corrupted or what it did, but basically would have had to re-edit, and I decided I wasn't going to re-edit my face again because I'd already watched it and I didn't love it anyway. So I've decided to refilm, and it's also about 11 PM and I just got the feeling to film, so that's why I look like I do. And yeah, I'm gonna go with it. I'm also wearing a Christmas jumper. It says "Merry Christmas, you filthy muggle," Harry Potter in there. But anyway, in the month of November I read 12 books. I had quite a good reading month, especially considering the fact that I moved in November and I started a new job and I completely moved to the other side. Well, it feels like the other side of the world. It wasn't actually, it was just 3 hours down the road, but you know, whatever. But yes, so let's get on and start with the books that I read in November. So the first sort of half of the books that I have, I actually don't have with me because I finished them when I was in my old house and I left them there, or took them to charity there. I didn't want to bring them all here. It was pointless moving them when I didn't need to. So the first book that I read was The Way of Shadows by Brent Weeks, which is a high fantasy book based on, I think it's a trilogy actually, and I actually have somewhere here books 2 and 3. I don't know if you can see those, to be honest. But yeah, I really enjoyed the first one. I gave it 3 stars. It was interesting. Definitely wasn't my favourite I've ever read. It was definitely along the same lines as kind of Brandon Sanderson, although I personally think Brandon Sanderson's was a little bit better. But that's just a personal preference, I guess. This basically is a world which follows a boy named AThon who... oh, I hear a fiance. Hello.
I hear a fiance.
Ah, he will me drink.
There you go. Enjoy. You need energy.
Thank you so much.
There you go. Enjoy that.
It looks really sophisticated, like it might be a cup of tea, but it's not a cup of tea. It's Pepsi. I drink it from a mug because I'm very posh and fancy. Anyway, what was I saying? So, it follows a boy named AThon who is, he's what I guess is called like a, what do they call them? Like, he like lives in the streets and he's, kind of, I don't know, trying to deal with life, I guess. He's not had a good childhood, and then his like one ambition in life is to be an apprentice for an assassin named, Durzo Blint, and then when he becomes that assassin, or that apprentice should I say, he has to change his name to Kyler, and he basically has to change his whole life, and he's not allowed to contact anybody from his previous life, and yeah, there's lots of things happen. It's a very, very, very gruesome book. I really, really enjoyed it though. Definitely want to read books 2 and 3, which like I said I've got up here that you can see. But yeah, I am very interested in continuing the series, and I'm very glad that I did read it, although it's a 650 page book, so that took me some time. The second book I read was on one on my Kindle, and this one actually was really, really surprising to me. I read Trail of Broken Wings by Casual Vacancy. I think that's how you say the name. Casual Vacancy is actually an Indian author, and this is an Own Voices novel, which basically follows a family. So there are a mother and father and 3 girls. The 3 girls are now grown up and have kind of lived, like one of them has moved away, one of them is like really high powered in her job, and one of them has kind of like a great family life. But what you realise is that at the beginning of this book, the father is in a coma and he's not expected to come out of the coma, and basically it follows the 3 girls and the mother trying to come to terms with the fact that they have really mixed feelings because the father was very abusive in many ways to the family, and so they have to kind of deal with that, and I think different sisters have different opinions of it and things. So yeah, it was a really interesting book. Again, I really liked this one. It was a 4-star. It was really, really well written. It talked a lot about Indian customs and about Indian families, and it's definitely not something that I have read before or have any kind of previous knowledge of, but I did really enjoy that one. So yeah, very much looking forward to reading more from the author. If I haven't actually looked into if they have more books, but I would love to read them if they do. The third book I read this month will pretty much be a 2-second review because I gave it a 1 star, hated it, didn't even like, I don't know, wasn't worth the read. It was Crooked Little Lies by Barbara Taylor Sissel, I think is how you say the name. Yeah, I didn't like it at all. It was just not very well written, and I did not enjoy the content of the book, so I'm not really going to talk about it too much, other than to say I wouldn't bother if I were you. It was a free book on my Kindle, and I can completely see why it was a free book as well. Then the fourth book I read was actually a buddy read, and I read this with the lovely Emily from Novelle Novels, who I absolutely adore. And this book was really, really amazing. It was The Casual Vacancy by J.K. Rowling, and I was unsure how I was going to feel about this when I started reading it. I've heard very, very mixed things. I feel like people hate it or they love it, and I didn't really see any in between. I gave it a 5 star. Absolutely loved it. I thought it was really, really well written. I think if you go into it thinking that it's going to be a J.K. Rowling, like, typical Harry Potter book, you're going to be disappointed because it's not that in any way. I could really see J.K. Rowling's like influence in the writing. Her writing style, although it's a very different genre, is really has certain things in it that really stick out to me. For example, her characterization of the kind of main people in it was really, really, really well done. And yeah, the one thing I will say is it's incredibly graphic, and there is a lot of bad language and a lot of like crudeness. Yeah, some of it probably not necessary, but I thought it was really interesting. But I loved, like, you either love or you hate all the characters, and I felt like there were so many characters, but they were so interesting, and it just was just really well done. It basically, if you don't know, follows a small town where a man dies, and he was on the parish council, and so when he dies he leaves what's known as a casual vacancy, in that there's a space for somebody to fill. And then it's kind of the politics of the town of them trying to fill it, which when I heard the synopsis, it doesn't sound that interesting, but it's actually really interesting and talks a lot about a lot of really important issues as well. So yeah, definitely a big fan of that one. The next book I read was Thomas Wildus and the Book of Sorrows by J.M. Bergen. I was actually sent this book by Book Publicity Services in exchange for my review, which I'm going to give now. I gave this a 4 star. I absolutely loved it. I thought it was a really, really good middle grade. It's not a like typical genre that I would read, but I absolutely loved it. I really did. It follows a boy named Thomas, funnily enough, Thomas Wildus, and his Book of Sorrows. No, I'm joking. It follows, yeah, Thomas Wildus, who is kind of caught up in a world of magic, and he meets a man who gives him a magic book and tells him to, you know, figure it out, have a read, see what you think, and it goes from there. It's so well done. His best friend in this, the relationship between the two of them is just beautiful, and in general I just found the whole thing really, really inspiring and loved reading it. So yeah, I would definitely read more from this author. I know there's more in the series, so yeah, I do want to continue. Next up is the book that I'm really disappointed in because I didn't really like it, or I gave it a 3 star. It was okay. I had much higher expectations for it, and I'm quite disappointed by that. I read The Tattooist of Auschwitz by Heather Morris. Was actually the book that you all picked for me for November. And I've heard loads of people love it. I know it's like some people's favourite book of this year, and I wanted to love it. I was really, really hoping I would. It's a true story, or it's based on a true story, of a man named Leil Sokolov, who was in the concentration camp of Auschwitz. And he is, when he's there, he is kind of given the task or the job, much to his kind of disappointment or, you know, horror. He's given the job of tattooing his fellow concentration camp prisoners as they come in, kind of the stereotypical, like the tattoo that we all know. And he is given that job, and then one day he meets a woman, or he sees a woman, and he kind of starts to fall in love with her from a distance, and he realises that he wants to protect her and to protect himself and get them both out of there at the end. Now, the premise of this, obviously, like I said, is based on a true story. It's a beautiful, you know, idea of a romance horrendous place. But the problem I found with this is the romance, because that was the main kind of aspect of this book. It talked a lot about the romance, but then I felt like it was really like against the idea of the like depravity, and I felt like it took away from that a lot. So while I was trying to get my head around some of the really horrendous things that were happening to them, and reading about that is obviously very difficult, and then it would go to like a really like romantic scene with the two of them, and I just couldn't compute the two together. And I'm not saying that it didn't happen, and I'm not trying to take away from the two people, but it just wasn't. I don't know if it just wasn't the. I don't know if I think it was the writing, the way it was written for me. I do really want to read Silka's story, which I think is the second one that Heather Morris has just released, because I think that will be a slightly different vibe to the book, I guess. Yeah, I wasn't a fan, and I really wanted to be, because I really like World War II books, and this obviously based on a true story. I thought it was going to be just up my street, but yeah, unfortunately found a little bit flat. Then we have another disappointing read, and this one was 800 pages long. I won't lie to you, I did not read the entirety of this book in November. You may or may not know that I think it was September, or was it August, I started buddy reading Anna Karenina by Leo Tolstoy with Charlie and Emily, and they both finished it in that month, and I did not, because I decided that I was going to put it on hold, and yeah, I stopped reading for a bit. And what ended up happening was it took me another like 2-3 months but I did eventually finish it, and I am glad to say that I read Anna Karenina. I finished the bloody thing but I gave it a 2-star because the ending, honestly, so something pretty big happens at the end of the book in the last 50 pages, and the last 30 pages ignore the fact that this really big thing just happened, basically, and it's a complete waste of my time. I was reading it thinking this book should have ended 30 pages ago, and to be honest, even if I had, I would not have enjoyed it. The writing in this I found to be a bit convoluted, and I really enjoyed this book for the first sort of couple of 100 pages, but then it got to the point where it just got ridiculous. And I really don't understand why this book is called Anna Karenina, because there are so many characters in this book, and it's equally about all of them. So the fact that it's just randomly called one of them, I don't really understand. Yeah. So that's the thing. Wasn't a fan. 2-star. That's a shame. So the next book that I read in the month of November was another buddy read that I did with the wonderful Nicole and Victoria. Nicole from Beautiful Chaos of Books and Victoria from What Victoria Read. Both channels I love, both girls I love. They're both amazing. And we buddy read All That Remains, A Life in Death by Sue Black, which is a non-fiction story based on Sue Black's life. It's a memoir of hers, which talks about her reactions to death in her everyday life, in personal and professional capacities, and she is a forensic anthropologist and a professor of anatomy. In this, she talks a lot about the different cases that she's had to deal with. She also talks about she did a quite extended period of time working in Kosovo during the war, where there was mass fatalities, and she had to deal with kind of she had to deal with identifying bodies and trying to kind of help in the war efforts and things, and this was a really interesting read. I gave this a 4-star. It wasn't quite as good as Unnatural Causes by Richard Shepherd that we read together a couple of months ago. But I think it's because I wasn't really sure what to expect. I think because I'd already read that one, this book I had expectations for, and it just wasn't quite what I was expecting. This is more of a memoir and a personal kind of essay on death itself, and what death means, and how to deal with that, and how to feel about death. And I think for me, this kind of came at a kind of a bad time. I really wasn't wanting to read about that kind of thing. It's also really, it would be very triggering for certain people in certain situations. There is also a massive section in the first, like in the introduction, about time and death as a concept. And you might not know this, but I have kind of a, I guess I'm triggered by that. something about it, about the whole element of time, is not something that I do well with. Let's put it that way. I don't really want to talk about it because it's kind of weird. It makes me feel a bit strange, but it's a thing. And so yeah, the introduction was a little bit triggering for me, which is never a good start to a book, if I'm honest, but I did persevere. I'm glad that we all read it. I think it's good that we read it together and we read it in like chunks rather than reading it all in one day kind of thing. I think that would have been a bit too much. I do think go into this with a lot of objectivity, I guess, and with just kind of realising what you're going to go into, like research this if you need to beforehand, because yeah, it's a little bit morbid in places. Talking about death though, I guess, so it makes sense. But yeah, definitely a good read though, and I'm glad that I read this, and if you are into that kind of side of things, I definitely would give it a read. So 4-star, I think I said that, but 4-star anyway. Next up, I read a book that was actually on my November TBR. Shock horror, I'm pretty sure it was the only book on my November TBR that I actually read, which, you know, hey, hats off to me, I read one of them. This is Sushi for Beginners by Marian Keyes, which is actually one of the books I was planning on giving away when I did my book unhaul a little while ago, which I will link up in the cards and in my description box down below if you want to go and check that out. I was going to get rid of this, but then I decided, no, it's Marian Keyes, I will continue to read, even though it's not really my genre anymore, but I really like Marian Keyes' writing, and she's very, very funny. She's a very funny Irish lady, and she has just a perfect sense of humour. This is an adult contemporary book set in Ireland, and it was just what I needed when I was moving. This was the book I read. It's massive, but it was quite a quick read. This follows 3 women in different stages of their lives. So it follows Lisa Edwards, who is a kind of really, you know, high up magazine editor who works in London, and she's expecting to get a promotion to New York, and what she gets is a new magazine to set up in Dublin, and so off she goes. It also follows Aisling Kennedy, who is Lisa's new assistant editor, and she is really worried about everything. She is trying to figure out her life. She's trying to figure out what she's doing, and yeah, lots of different things there. And it also follows Clodagh Kelly, who is Aisling's best friend, and Aisling has what seems to be Clodagh has what seems to be Aisling's dream life. She has the perfect husband, she has, you know, a boy and a girl, she's loving life, she's married. However, she's not very happy with that, and yeah, it goes from there. Like I said, this is really, really lovely. It's a kind of nice sort of light to read until you get to the parts where some like shit goes down, and then you realise not so light. Really, really good though. Would definitely recommend, especially if you enjoy kind of that women's contemporary, I guess you would say. Yeah, definitely an interesting read, worth it, in my opinion. Also, didn't know if I said that was a 4-star exactly. And then we have the 3 books that I read on the very last day of the month. So Violet and the Never-Ending TBR, I will link her channel down below. She did a 24-hour never-ending readathon, I think that's what she's called it, and I decided to take part really last minute because I wanted to read and I ended up having a day off, so I thought, why not? So I decided to pick a load of short books from my shelves. I did like an Instagram story kind of vlog moment, and I ended up reading 3 of them, which I think is pretty impressive, to be honest, in one day. So the first book I read, I was actually sent during this month from the wonderful Victoria, from What Victoria Read. She had seen me talk on Twitter about the fact that my little dog had to be put down like the couple of days after I moved. And yeah, I was really sad about it, obviously. It's a really horrible thing to happen. And it meant that she sent me a lovely little note and a wonderful book that I was very happy about, so I decided to read this as the first one for that readathon. So I read 'Twas the Night Shift Before Christmas by Adam Kay, which is kind of the sequel, but you can read it without having read the previous one, to This Is Going to Hurt by Adam Kay, which I read, I think, last year, and I absolutely loved it. Basically, This Is Gonna Hurt is a series of diaries that Adam Kay has written. Adam Kay worked for the NHS as a GP. No, he did not. Adam Kay worked for the NHS as a doctor in a hospital, and he had written the book based on his diaries and had sort of talked about the different things that he had had to go through. working for the NHS, the kind of good things, the bad things, and all the other things in between. This is basically his kind of diary entries of his Christmas experiences. So he has 7 Christmases working for the NHS, and he worked on every single one of them, and it kind of talks about that. And again, it's really funny, it's really like heartbreaking, and it's also a little bit gross in places. There's some really horrible stories in here, and yeah, I really enjoyed this. I think Adam Kay's humour is amazing, and also the fact that he talks about like something that's so kind of key to pretty much everybody. Like in the UK, we all have pretty much everybody's used the NHS at some point. So yeah, I really respected him for this book, and yeah, I really enjoyed reading it, so I would definitely recommend. So I gave that one, like I say, 5-star. But the next one I read during that readathon was Private Gold by James Patterson with Jassy McKenzie, which is one of the bookshots. This is obviously from the Private series, which is one of my favourite series of James Patterson's, if you didn't already know. This follows Private South Africa, and it follows a man named Joey Montague who runs Private South Africa, and he is trying to pack up the branch for now after his partner's tragic suicide. He is during this time he is the acting as a bodyguard for an American woman who has come to South Africa for certain reasons. This book was definitely an interesting read. I'm glad that I've read it. Like I say, it's a bookshot, so it's a really short one, but it wasn't my favourite from the series. I don't know if I feel like this one was like so short that it kind of skipped over any interesting bits. Yeah, I just wasn't really a fan, to be honest. I did not find it that interesting, and yeah, I feel like this series could probably have done without it. However, seeing as it's part of it, I am glad that I've read it. And then the last book that I read in the month of November was not a good one, so that was a great ending. This one was a 2-star read, and it is The Colorado Kid by Stephen King, which I'm really sad about because I love Stephen King and generally pretty much loved everything he's written that I've read. This one is a book I don't understand. So this is a short story. It's part of the Hard Case Crime series, and Stephen King wrote this book specifically for this series, and it basically is a mystery novel where 2 elderly newspapermen are telling a story to a young girl who's joined the newspaper, about a man who was found dead off the coast of Maine, and there's no ID on the body. They don't know who he is, and they don't know how he died. They don't know if it was murder, suicide, if it was an accident, if it was just, I don't know, they just don't know anything about it. And then the mystery. There is a mystery to this element. You hear the mystery in it, right? The mystery doesn't get solved. The point of the book, apparently, is Stephen King has tried to, it says, Stephen King could tell the story about the darkness at the heart of the unknown and our compulsion to investigate the unexplained. So he's decided to give us a book where you don't know what happened. There is no answer. I don't understand. I don't know if I'm just not grasping the point of this, but I don't see the point of it. So yeah, I didn't like this. I found it just pointless, to be honest. Yeah, so a 2-star from me, I'm afraid. So there you are, guys. That is all of the books that I read in the month of November. I hope that you enjoyed it. Let me know in the comments down below what you read in November and if you've read any of these books before and what you thought of them. Give this video a thumbs up if you enjoyed it, and subscribe to my channel if you haven't already, and I shall see you next time for another video. Bye, guys.